everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. I am Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And for I
was going to interrupt you on this one. Well, first of all, I should say that the only Kenyan or Swahili word I know is jambo. So jambo.
Yeah, I learned that one too. Jambo. Everybody says it.
That's the end. But the reason we're joking about is Matt is recently back from Kenya, which obviously is a fantastic destination for photography and wildlife photography, but obviously is associated much more with the animals that live on land there. But Matt, being an underwater photographer, was far more interested in what was underwater. And for me, I've been snorkeling in Kenya, but I've never been diving in Kenya. And I'm fascinated to find out what you went and saw, especially because you went to a very unique spot there. So maybe, Matt, you can tell us where you went and why you went there.
Yeah, so this was a delayed honeymoon trip. So we got married back in September, but then Ariana's Thanksgiving break was now, and she got in a couple extra days, so it was the easiest time to take off, and it coincided with a good time of year for diving in Kenya. And initially, when we were looking at places to go, we knew we wanted to do Africa because we both like Africa. I've been there twice previously; she's been there once, and we wanted to go somewhere in Africa that neither of us had been. And we were trying to figure out where can we go that we can dive and do topside stuff. And I had no idea that Kenya had diving, to be honest. I knew it had a coast, obviously, but I didn't know anything about the diving there. And then I was cruising iNaturalist one day, and I think I was looking at Zanzibar or something like that. And then I was searching, frogfish and rhinopias and all this kind of stuff. And I kept seeing this little tiny, all of these pins pop up at the southern tip of Kenya. So I just zoomed in, and there's this tiny little channel. And I was calling this place, it's called Waisini Channel. And to me, it's like Lembeh Light. It's geographically set up almost the exact same way, with a small island and a narrow channel between that and the mainland. And the habitat's very similar. A lot of the wildlife is very similar. And I found all these records on iNaturalist, and it was all by the same guy. So I found him on every different social media platform and messaged him. And fortunately, he got back to me.
Basically,
I did. I essentially stalked him, and then he eventually got back to me. And he is a man of very few words, and he was like, "Yeah, this place is cool. Talk to this guy." And he sent me to who turned out to end up being our guide in Kenya for all of our diving, who was a very nice guy, very good guide. And I was like, "Oh, it's going to be some random dive guy in Kenya. He's not going to really know what I want to do, what I want to see." And I messaged him, and it turns out that his main thing is frogfish. Like, that's what he gets excited about. And it was destined at that point. So I talked to him.
I'm glad you got to spend your honeymoon with the love of your life, at least.
Yeah, exactly. But I messaged him back and forth, and I kind of gave him ideas on what we wanted to do, and he was very flexible with it. And we ended up having him essentially as our private guide for the whole week. And we had planned to do some topside stuff too. And then when we got there, it turned out that the area we were in is very remote. And the only reason really that you would go there would be to dive, because the safari stuff that's nearby, it's not really safari stuff. It's like a safari experience, and they'll take you to parks that really don't have any of the charismatic megafauna. There's the town we were in, has like 20 buildings. And the only places to eat really are the hotel we stayed, or the lodge we stayed at, and then the lodge where the dive operation is. And they're separated by like half a mile, so we would just walk from our place down to the dive shop every morning, suit up and get in one of their little dinghies. And the boat rides are anywhere from 15 seconds to a minute and a half at most, just diving along this channel. And you can do some offshore reefs too, which we did. But we did a day of that, and we're like, oh, we're good just staying in the muck areas in the channel itself.
So just to understand the geography of it all, so you flew to Nairobi, I guess, and then took another plane down to maybe Mombasa and then drove? Or?
Yeah. So the travel aspect of this trip was a nightmare. We spent like a cumulative 26 hours sitting in airports. We had 3 missed flights. We had one flight on our way home. I've never been on a flight where they go slower in the air than they initially said they were going to. So we ended up being on the big flight home from Nairobi to JFK for an extra 2 hours in the air time. And I didn't know that the planes that big could actually fly as slowly as we were going, because you can watch all the data and stuff on the screen. And we were going under 400 miles an hour for the
Oh
vast
wow.
majority of that flight. So that's another connection we missed, the one coming home. So that, yeah, we went from Florida to New York to Nairobi to Mombasa, and then had a 2 hour drive by van or whatever down to where we were staying.
So it's about 2 hour car drive from Mombasa. So if people
Yes,
were like on a vacation and were planning a few days in Mombasa, you could do a day trip down there. I mean, it's quite a
yeah.
long trip, but it's
So
yeah.
I mean, Mombasa is not really a place to stay. I don't think most people who go to that area are staying in Diani Beach, which is kind of halfway between the two.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't
so
know. Yeah.
if you're staying in Diani, they most of the clients for the dive operation we used come as day trippers from Diani. It's only about 45 minutes, maybe an hour.
Okay. And you
So
haven't
the
told us the name of anyone yet either, if
oh,
people are interested.
so we stayed at Shimoni Reef Lodge, and then
Oh,
the dive
send me a picture.
operation. Oh yeah.
Let me pull that up, and then we can
So
see.
Shimoni Reef Lodge, and geographically, like you said, it's at the very, very southeast tip of Kenya. You can see Tanzania from the lodge, um,
And can
and
you
you can
see the islands, Zanzibar, from there?
no.
Because they're
So
not far
Zanzibar,
away, are they?
no, there you can get there by boat relatively quickly,
Mm,
but the it's not that close to be able to see it. But yeah, we stayed at Shimoni Reef, and then the dive operation was called Pili Pipa Dhow, and it's named after the kind of boats they use
mm,
in the area.
mm.
So Shimoni was really nice. It's a I wouldn't say it's like a 5-star hotel, but it was clean. The food was good, and they have the amenities that you would need. They have pools and all that kind of stuff as well if you
Mm.
care about that. There's monkeys on the property. There's geckos on the property, chameleons on the property, which is cool. Um, and then you just walk down this little dirt road, half a mile to a place. It's called Firefly Eco Resort, and I think the next picture is the gate of that place, which is cool. I did a little mural on it, yeah.
But
And
did you
then
carry your camera that half a mile, or did you?
yeah, so the first day it ended up being really cool because we ended up just becoming friends with everybody who worked at the dive operation, and the guy who actually owned it just picked us up for the first day. So we drove all our dive gear down there and left it there for the week. And then when we'd come back on the boat, they would just drop us on the boat back at our hotel. But in the
Yeah,
mornings, we would just I would put it in a duffel bag and I just carried the camera
mm.
down the road to the dive shop. Um,
It's very
and yeah,
exciting to like be, really on a kind of a frontier, but one that has got really interesting marine life. It's very,
yeah,
very interesting.
and I mean, like we had no idea how the trip was going to go. Like you can see things on iNaturalist, you see all these cool critters, but I didn't know anybody who'd ever been there. And before I met them, I'm talking to the dive guide, and I'm like, well, I don't know if he's going to be objective about how good this place actually is.
Mm,
And he actually tempered my expectations quite well. He downplayed a lot of things, which was nice because then it kind of surpassed expectations.
yeah.
Um, when we actually did get in the water.
Mm.
But
I'll move
yeah,
us on. So,
yeah. So that's just the dive shop. There's a little building next to the owner lives on the property. His house is right next door, and then they just have this little dive shop with full compressors. They have all the rental gear you would need if you wanted to rent gear. We did bring all our own stuff except for tanks and weights, obviously. And he owns 6 dogs, so it was a nice benefit that we could go every morning and play with the dogs before getting on the boat. Um,
I think there's,
Yeah, there's a picture in here somewhere
I
of the puppy,
I
but
think the puppy was here
yeah, there he
was
is.
admiring your stroke,
Yeah,
saying, "Yeah, I think the position it could do with coming a bit further forward, and you definitely want to connect that sync cable." I think the
yeah.
dog.
Well, so it turned. We'll get to the sync cables because they ended up being a bane of my existence on this trip.
I
Um,
see that you're shooting here with wide angle.
yeah, so Nauticam was kind enough to loan me A93, Sony A93 housing, MFO3, and the FCP. The FCP ended up proving useless. There's essentially no wide angle opportunities there. If you were shooting like the EMWL or maybe the 13 mil, you could get away with it.
But
But
it's a macro.
yeah, there's no big animals. You get dolphins in the area. We saw them from the surface, but to go there hoping to photograph dolphins in the water is unrealistic. And they have reefs, but they're not like you would see in the Red Sea or Raja or things like that, where
Yeah,
there's nice.
they've been fished and exploited heavily, the reefs in that
Yeah,
area. I mean, in the 80s, Kenya was, particularly off Mombasa, was promoted as quite a popular diving place, relatively easy to get reach. There was already a tourism industry there, and there were reefs and lots of fish. But actually, I think kind of from that point on, it just got fished, and there was a lot of reef collecting as well. So the reef
yeah,
structure got damaged a lot, and it kind of dropped off the radar a bit. But obviously, at that time, no one was interested in the macro stuff.
yeah,
But I don't think it's a bad thing that it is kind of an out and out macro destination, because
yeah,
I think that part of a potential market for this are keen underwater photographers who say maybe go to Kenya or northern Tanzania on a photo safari on land, and then can take with them a housing and a macro lens and maybe a couple of small strobes, a relatively compact kit, and then add a few days of photography at the end. So
yeah.
the fact that it isn't one of these you have to take everything destinations is possibly quite a good thing.
Yeah, if we were going to go back there, I would definitely just bring a much more streamlined kit than I did. And,
Yeah,
you live and learn. We had no idea. We never didn't know anybody who would dive there, so
yeah, no,
I
you've
took
got to
everything
take.
just in case. But yeah, I ended up using Mac. We I think we ended up doing 10 dives, and I did macro on 9 of those.
Yeah,
So it's very much a macro focused
yeah.
place, and there's plenty to shoot if you're doing macro. And it's kind of the only place I've experienced like this. And I have, admittedly, my experience is relatively limited worldwide. Um, in Lembeh, there's, you have people in the water, and there's something here, something here, something here, and it gets kind of overwhelming because you can't shoot it all. There were some dives here that were like that, where there's just too much. There's too much to shoot, and you have to sacrifice certain subjects just
But
because there's an overabundance of them.
that's pretty amazing to hear. And we'll get on to the underwater pictures in a sec, because I think one of the reasons Lembeh dives are like that is because the guides know the site so well.
Yeah,
And it's kind of, if you arrived at Lembeh and no one had been diving there and you jumped in, the dives wouldn't necessarily be as crazy as they are as a tourist when you go to Lembeh, because what you realize the longer you stay in Lembeh is actually it's about knowing the sites, knowing what was there last time is kind of a big key to finding at least half the sightings on any one dive.
yeah.
So the fact in a place like this that isn't being dived intensively like Lembeh, that they're finding critters at that level, suggests the underlying amount of subjects is very high.
Yeah,
Um,
and we so it's you mentioned the coral. So there's actually 2 people living there. One, the guy I find an eye naturalist, and this other girl who are doing a coral restoration project in the channel where you
mm,
dive. And they also would dive with us in the evenings. Like they would do their work dives during the day and then dive with us in the evenings. And it was kind of like that. So there ended up being 5 of us, which is a lot of eyes to be looking at for tiny critters. And there was almost never downtime between shooting something. You would find something, somebody else would find something, you'd switch off with them. They were all just carrying TG6s just to record things. They weren't,
yeah.
actually seriously photographing, which was nice because then they'd take one quick voucher picture and then move on and go find something else and let me shoot the things I wanted to shoot.
Mm.
Um, but
Well, I
yeah, it
think we
ended up
should have a look
being
at
like,
some of these pictures, shouldn't we?
yeah. So I
Um,
think there's a picture. Yeah. So this is the channel.
yeah.
I think it's a mile and a half wide at the widest,
So
and it's
very
maybe,
similar in width to Lembeh.
yeah, but it's much smaller. I think the total length is maybe 3 miles.
Yeah.
Um,
Whereas
and
Lembeh is
it's
about 10 miles long. As a
Yeah,
chunk, I
yeah,
think.
and it
And
has they
it's
really
flat
only dive.
island as well, rather than
Yeah,
the
yeah, there's no
mountainous.
mountains.
Yeah.
Yeah. They really only usually dive 3 sites. So we did those 3 sites and just kind of did them in rotation. We did all of them during the day and at night, and they're all very different from daytime to nighttime. But it was nice too because then we could go revisit a couple of subjects and things like that, which ended up being useful because I had a number of gear issues that didn't ruin but made the first half of the trip very unproductive photographically.
Yeah, it's always the thing when you borrow gear, I have to say. But what? Just quickly on the channel. How deep does it drop down to in the middle?
So maximum depth is 140 feet.
So it is
Um,
properly deep then. That's
yeah,
probably
so it's
deeper
it's
than
very
Lembeh.
gradual, and then it really quickly drops off, and then it really quickly rises again.
Ah,
So it slopes down to like probably 50 or 60, then it flattens out, and then you can go deeper again.
because
And they
seeing the
do,
flat islands like this, you wouldn't think that drops deep between
yeah,
them.
and they do
So
get like big animals in there. They say there's some really cool deep water corals and things down in the middle.
Mm,
Like they've had the bowmouth guitar shark or guitar sharks in there.
yeah,
They've had humpbacks in there, all sorts of things like that as well. So they
really
do
interesting.
get big animals in there, but the chances of seeing them are slim.
Yeah, and I have to say that there are from Mozambique up to this area at least, there is this whole area is known for having critters,
Yeah,
and who knows what's further north, because obviously countries like Somalia and Yemen and
Ethiopia.
Eritrea, they're not places people are naturally going just for random dive exploration. Right. Now we're into the good stuff.
Yeah.
I've pulled up a page of what look like are they all painted frogfish?
Yeah, so we saw four frogfish species on the
Mm,
trip, but the painteds were the most prolific and the only ones I got. So interestingly, the biggest frogfish we saw was maybe 4 inches. And that was we only saw one that size. All of the rest of them were about an inch or smaller, and that
mhm.
really small one bottom left was about the size
Yeah.
of a tic tac. And but the odd thing is they don't really see adults. So they see a ton of juveniles up to like 2 inches, and then the guide was saying they all disappear. And he's like, you'll get the giant, like the giant frogfish out on the reefs. We didn't see any. He
Mm.
said, but he's not sure where all the adults go, if they go deeper or if they move out to the reefs. But they only ever see the juveniles 99% of the time.
But
Um,
that's
but
not uncommon in a lot of areas like Bali as well. I always kind of you see loads of painted frogfish there, but they tend to be all young ones.
okay,
So it may be, I mean, it may be season. It may, like you say, if the channel drops down to 150 feet, they don't have to move far to
yeah,
suddenly get into a different habitat, and they're only exploring a very small area. But yeah, fascinating to see.
yeah. But we
And yeah,
did.
sorry,
So we saw painted Randall's, Harry, and I'm drawing a blank on what the fourth one was. But we saw
warty
frogfish.
frogfish, or maybe,
It wasn't warty. Maybe it was a juvenile warty.
yeah,
Um, but the one site that was right off of the dive operation is it's just a sandy slope with it's very similar to some of this like hairball and lembe where it's sandy slope, maybe a little bit of seagrass, and then the random odd sponge or coral here and there, and there's just critters everywhere, and especially frogfish. We saw a couple dives where we had double-digit frogfish on them,
very very
which is
cool.
really cool. Yeah, and the very first dive we did, I think we had 12 frogfish and 4 species, so that was cool.
Wow.
Yeah, and the one downside about that particular site is there's a very thick algae that he says was seasonal, um, and it was just constantly floating past in the pictures, sticking to the animals, or they would use it as cover, which is awful to try to shoot through.
Yeah.
So you ended up having to pick and choose which frogfish you photograph just based on the ones that weren't stuck in some cluster of
It's not
crap.
not not really like a problem you can get a lot of sympathy for, though, that you're having to
Yeah, I know.
choose which of your frogfish you're going to shoot
Yeah.
based on the
Um,
algae.
but I tried to photograph most of the
Mm,
ones we saw,
mm,
but they're beautiful. And this was my favorite. This was my favorite individual. So we
mm.
saw this one the very first dive, and it was like I said, it was tucked up into like a clump of algae, and there was no realistic way to photograph it unless you pulled all this stuff off, which
Mm.
we're not going to do. And then I think it was the second to last dive we did, the last night dive. We refound it, and it was underneath like some seagrass, and this was the only perspective you could get on it without again moving all the grass or pulling the fish out. But I think this is a beautiful animal. Like I love the
Mm.
stippling on it, and that kind of off white color, and I
Yeah.
like his little feet plastered the sides. And this was so I had the Sony 90
Oh, sorry.
and the Kraken Plus 6 for all the super macro
Mm.
stuff, and then for bigger subjects was the MFO3, which did grow on me over the course of the trip.
Yeah, I have to say
Mm.
this frogfish on the left there looks quite a bit bigger.
Yeah, so that was the big one we saw. So that was the full grown painted that we found
Yeah.
on the very last dive. And that was the only adult we saw the entire time. And the guide was shocked to see it. He's like, we never see the adults.
Mm.
Um, but that site was, and the devilfish was found on the same one.
Yeah.
It was a mix of like reef and rubble and muck. So you had
Mm.
a whole diversity of subject matter on that particular site, which was cool.
Yeah, and
And the
you kind of
devilfish,
expect to see Inimicus
yeah,
around the
yeah,
same place as the Antinarius. Right.
yeah. And then of course, classic reef fish.
Yeah, but I think all of these, I'd say, are also kind of classic muck diving type subjects.
Yeah,
With the with there's the hawkfish at the top. Those on the barrel sponges are kind of quite a popular subject. The trunk fish, the lionfish, and the domino damsel. Did you? I know that the anemone fish, throughout the Indian Ocean, they're kind of, because the populations are quite spread out. You've got all these anemone fish that kind of look a bit like Red Sea anemone fish to me, which are just kind of browny yellow ones with a couple of stripes and then slight variations in the tail. Have all been classified as different species because the populations are isolated. Did you see any of the East African anemone fish?
so the only ones we saw were those browny yellow ones.
Yeah, that's
And
probably them. They're
then
not they're not very excited. They just look like the
yeah,
others. So yeah.
and then we saw, I think it's called a skunk anemone fish, the one that has just a single stripe going right down the
Okay,
middle of its body.
I didn't know that
Um,
one went it got over
yeah,
there.
there were plenty of them. All of the anemones were in, so it's because of that narrow channel, it is prone to currents. So we did have some currents some days,
Yeah.
and the most of the anemones we found were all in real shallow water with pretty significant currents.
Mm,
So I didn't spend too much time focusing on the
yeah.
anemone fish. But a lot of those reef fish were new for me. Like I'd never seen the yellow boxfish and
Mm,
emperor angelfish, things like that. I'd never seen. So I did spend quite a bit of time just enjoying shooting fish
yeah.
randomly on the reef, even though we went for the muck stuff.
Mm, yeah. Very nice. But back into sort of the
Yeah,
crittery stuff. Some very nice ghost pipefish. Not quite sure. Are they robusts?
I think
Um,
they're robust. Yeah,
the one in the male in the top right looks maybe like it's a rough snout, and
yeah. But
um,
he was glued to that one, so I assumed it was also robust. But I don't know if they
yeah.
hybridized. I don't know.
No, I think they're quite variable in
Hmm.
form. I always feel the robust has a little bit more of a gap before its tail. But anyway,
Oh, I don't
but
know.
yeah, but I'm not. I tend to deal with them on a case by case. But the rough snouts always have those little fluffy bits coming
Yeah,
off their snouts. And then
but
is that the seahorse? Is that the species of seahorse they get in the Red Sea as well? Which I can't remember. It,
I think it's a thorny seahorse. I don't know what
oh,
they're.
they're
I
very.
think they.
It's basically the one they get in the Red Sea is a variation of the thorny seahorse. Its Latin
Okay.
name begins with a J, J. Cari or so. I can never remember its Latin name, but I know it extends out into the Indian Ocean. But having never dived in this part of the world, I don't know if that's it. And then you've got a razorfish as well on his own.
Yeah. So the thorny seahorse was new for me. So
Mm,
that was cool. We saw I think 4 or 5 of them. I'd never seen the razorfish, which so they were new.
mm,
We never saw them in big groups. The most we saw together was maybe 2 or 3, and
mm,
always at night. Um, and then the ghost pipefish, I'd hope to see 1 or 2 because I've seen ghost pipefish here and there in the past, but never frequently. And then they ended up being on every dive, which was it's all robust and all brown, but
yeah,
they're still really cool fish.
yeah.
Um,
I
they're
I
quite
do
shy.
find ghost pipefish are quite seasonal in places. So it
Okay.
may, and I know, for example, when I go to Lembeh, I always find there's more ghost pipefish if I go in that kind of autumnal time, kind of September, October, November time, than at other times of the year.
Hmm.
Whereas in the Philippines, often the spring is very good for ghost pipefish.
Oh,
But
interesting.
just so I think ghost pipefish, they're not very long lived as adults. They're very long lived in their larval stages, which is why they're so widespread. And I think that there do seem to be quite strong seasonality in some places about when the adults arrive. And obviously, it makes sense for them to arrive all at once because they're not a particularly common species. And if they were all arriving individually through the year, they might
Yeah,
not find a mate. So it would make
that's true.
sense that their biology could have made them um, um, sort of consistent like that. I was just going to comment on the seahorse. That I would check the idea against that Red Sea Indian
Okay.
Ocean species
Okay.
because it's basically a variation on it looks like a thorny seahorse, but it's from a different part of the world. I mean, the one there looks like a thorny seahorse to me too, but I can't remember what
Yeah.
the differences are.
We did see
But
another species. I think the other one is Hippocampus kudu or something like that.
yeah, they just yeah,
Yeah, the 2 we saw were laying flat on the sand and brown, so I didn't bother messing with them too much.
that's what
But
they do a lot of the time. So, Right, and then some leaf scorpion fish.
Yep. So those were also new for me.
Mm,
Despite being to Lembeh and Analau,
mm.
I'd never seen one.
This is
And then we
lovely.
ended up Thank you. We ended up finding five.
Mm,
So we found that first yellow one, and it was in just an absolutely atrocious position. So it was they have built these domes for
yeah.
coral regrowth, and it was sitting on one of the little beams of the dome, but it was up to the right of the frame. There was a big barrel sponge, so you couldn't really get any other angle on it except for this. And then to get any lighting on it, I had to have one strobe kind of inside the cage, and then another strobe up and outside the cage, and it was just kind of a pain in the ass.
Mm.
But it was my first leaf fish, so I was going to get some sort of picture of it, and this was the best I could manage of it. And we went and saw him two more times, and he was in worse positions both of those times, or she.
Yeah, I was
So it
going to
never
say,
got.
as a subject, if they're not in a good position, they're always worth revisiting because they do tend to like they stay in very much the same area, but they always seem to move spot a
Yeah,
lot more than say a frogfish does.
yeah.
So yeah, you often when you return back, you get a better opportunity. Is this MFO3?
This one, actually, the previous one was as well.
Yeah.
That one was also. So this was the. This one had a mate, and I don't know if I put that picture in. Maybe it's the next one, but she had a mate. Yeah. So the first day we saw her, um, the mate was off, a couple feet away.
Mm.
But it gave me a nice chance to shoot her, for, the previous portrait, and she was in a much, as you can see, in a much better position than the yellow one.
Yeah.
Um, and then the next day when we dove that site again, her mate was. I was actually photographing her, and he came over for 2 seconds. I managed to
Mm,
get them both in the frame, and then he wandered off again. But she actually hadn't moved. She was in the exact same spot
mm.
she had been in the day before.
So much
Um,
for me saying they move around.
yeah, and yeah, and the MFO3 really came in handy for that because it almost gives you like that close focusy wide angle sort of
Yeah.
feel if you can get right on your subject. And then for this, being able to get them both in the frame, which wouldn't have happened if I had been shooting the Bear 90 unless I backed way off.
Mm,
And then we found two more leaf fish that were actually underneath the ledge that those two were sitting on, but they were both face first into the wall. There's
yeah.
no way to shoot that. One was purple, one was tan.
And then I was
Um,
gonna ask about cephalopods.
yeah.
Obviously there's cuttlefish here. Um, is the area good for octopus? You would think so with that sort of habitat.
So we did see a couple octopus.
Mm,
We saw their version of a long arm. I don't
yeah.
know the exact species.
I don't think
Uh,
anyone knows
and
what the, the
yeah,
exact
yeah,
species of long
exactly.
arm octopus are.
Then we saw day octopus,
Mm.
and then they do have a couple other species which we didn't see.
You probably get
But there are,
mimics down there occasionally, I would think.
yeah, they might. I don't know.
Mm,
And then they get pharaoh cuttlefish. I think is their only cuttlefish, and they
mm.
are everywhere. Like to the point where you just stop photographing them because you'd see 15 or 20 on a night dive.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
but I'd never seen a pharaoh cuttlefish. Ariana had never seen a cuttlefish, period. So they were her top thing to see. And then within 10 minutes on our very first dive, we'd seen like five of them.
Mm,
But they're so cool. We have nothing like that in the Atlantic or on our side of the Atlantic.
yeah, no, yeah.
Getting to hang out with them was a treat and watch them and all that kind of thing. And
They're always up to
they all
something.
kind of look, yeah, they all kind of look relatively the same. But so you kind of look for different angles to shoot them at or different poses that they're doing or things like that. Um, and they fortunately we had plenty of chances. And then just one more of the devilfish. So
Mm,
this was the very last subject that we found on the last dive. And I had actually been talking to the guys the day before and I was like, hey, do you ever see the devilfish? And they're like, yeah, they're around, but not super frequently. And at the very end of the last dive, I was headed towards the surface, and I looked down and spotted this just sitting in this little depression in the sand,
mm.
and got a couple frames. Although I had accidentally somehow I bumped something on the camera and turned the live view setting back on. So and then I couldn't figure out where in the menu it was to turn it off. So I shot all of the devilfish pictures blind because I couldn't actually see what I was doing. So I would turn the shutter speed down really low so that the live view setting would adjust for it, compose and focus, then quickly turn the shutter speed back up, and then take the picture and hope that I hadn't moved too much. And it worked out okay. It wasn't ideal, obviously, but um, the I had to have pressed one of the buttons on the housing to do that so quickly. So then I was just repressing all the buttons on the housing that I was like, maybe one of the custom buttons is set that way, and I couldn't figure it out. So I have to, the camera is still set to the live view settings effect on, so I have to figure out how to turn that off. But um, yeah, just a really cool fish, and as we all know, I love weird fish. And this was a good one to end on, and this ended
Yeah.
up being Ariana's favorite find of the whole trip as well.
Yeah, and I know that the Red Sea anemacus is a different species to the ones you see in particularly through Southeast Asia. So I wonder if this is also a different species because it looks like a big one, but it looks more substantial than the anemacus in that that I see in Lembeh, for example. Right, I'm
Yeah,
going to bring us
I've
back
never seen a couple. So,
on the full
yeah.
screen. I think I just wanted to finish off with talking a bit more about the practicalities of it. So, what is the name of this channel again, so people can look it up?
Uh, it's
Oh,
Waisini Channel, Wasini.
okay.
Um,
We'll
and
see.
then the dive operation is Pili Pipa Dow, and Dow is Dhow.
Yeah.
But if you look that up online, it'll come right up. Um, and then, logistically, just because we came from the States and we had so many flight issues, it was kind of a pain in the ass. I think if you're coming from Europe or somewhere closer, it's going to be much less stressful than ours was because you have less connections and
Yeah.
a much shorter travel distance. And I think if you're in proximity to it, or like you said, if you're already in Kenya for something else, it's absolutely worth doing some diving there because it's, especially if you're into critters and muck diving, because it's very good. I think if you have to travel 40 hours to get somewhere, going to somewhere like Lembeh is going to be worth your while,
Yeah. And you've
more
got
so.
quite a structure there, for
Yeah.
dive. This
But
is
the nice thing about the Kenya thing is, like, if you, especially because we were the only ones there, really, you can kind of ask the guide, be like, hey, can we go do this today? Can we go do that today? Can we do
yeah.
4 dives today, 1 dive tomorrow? And they're totally open to it,
And
which was really nice.
also, it's a completely original place, and there's
Also that.
pictures like this. There's lots of African photo competitions where the pictures have to be from
That's true.
Africa, and stuff like this will really stand out.
Yeah.
Then just finally on you would recommend very much a macro only sort of destination.
Yeah. I mean, you should definitely bring something, like I was wishing I'd had an EMWL or something like that for a lot of the certain subjects, like the devilfish or the leaf fish, things like that,
Mm,
cuttlefish. But for the most part, yeah, like if you took, a long macro lens, a short macro lens, or a long macro lens and something like the MFO, and then a diopter,
yeah.
you'd be covered for 99.9% of the things you're going to see. Um,
And probably if you're
and
only planning a day or two there, you could take single strobe as well. For
yeah,
example, just take a housing, a macro port, single strobe, and you'd be pretty well set up to add this at the end of a kind of safari trip or something.
so it's funny you mentioned the single strobe because for the first, like I said, we only did 10 dives, and for the first 7, I was having endless gear issues, and I could not figure out what was going on. I took the Retro Pro Maxes, and they were just very unreliable. And I was like, I have no idea what's happening. I couldn't get them to work. One would fire, then the other one would fire, then neither of them would fire. So I ended up spending a lot of time just shooting blank pictures of the. Oh, I got a stat for you. I took a total of 638 pictures, not including like the test shots trying to get things to work.
Mm,
Um, and then it turned out eventually, I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner, but I took the ends off of the fiber optic cables I was using, and all of I don't know how it happened. The ends of all of them had become totally frayed, and even though it was putting light through, it didn't seem to be enough to trigger the retros. So for the last 3 dives, I switched over to a backup pair of cables that I thankfully brought, and the vast majority of the pictures in this were from those last 3 dives when things were actually working decently.
mm.
So it was an exercise in frustration for the first part of the trip, just because I couldn't figure out what was happening, and
Yeah.
obviously you need light for shooting underwater, especially macro stuff.
Mm,
But once I got it figured out, I felt like an idiot that I hadn't figured it out sooner,
mm.
but also I was glad that I had figured it out sooner. And one thing, I did take our now mutual friend John Barron's forthcoming flash trigger with me, and it worked flawlessly the whole time. Never had to charge it, never worried about it. So I'm looking forward to using that a lot more.
Yeah, we'll talk about that on the show, as we mentioned a couple of times,
Yeah,
when John is really ready to do his production run on those.
yeah,
So we're not keeping it secret. We're just kind of waiting for him to be ready. And I think a lot of photographers will want that as a backup system because it's going to be very competitively priced. And I think it's just a nice solid piece of gear. Right.
Yeah.
With that, I think that's a great place to wrap up. It was fascinating to hear about somewhere that's just not even on the diving map, and hearing actually it really should be from the sound of it, certainly from the levels of sightings you were getting, given that you just turned up, when it suited
Yeah.
you to go. You didn't go for a particular season and you were getting that number of creatures. Really exciting. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And thank you to all of you for watching another episode of the Underwater Photography Show.